Hello from Geneva. I'm Galip Talay, Research Director at Sharq Forum. Today we are having a seminar in partnership, a workshop in partnership with European Council on Foreign Relations on the Palestinian issue in a collapsing regional context. Here I have Hugh Lovatt, who is the project coordinator for Israel and Palestine at European Council on Foreign Relations. Welcome, Hugh.
Thanks.
Hugh, Europe has been quite active in Israeli policy dispute from early on, from Barcelona process to up until EU Mediterranean process or part of the European neighborhood. The issue of Palestine was quite fundamental. Does Palestine, or the issue of Palestine, the Palestinian issue, still matters for Europe?
I think it does. I think when one looks at the region at the moment, there are quite a few other issues that are crowding out the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in terms of foreign policy priorities for Europe and the international community at large. But I think Europe in particular has always had a special relationship with Israel and the Palestinians. Since the 80s, and we've had the different declarations, the Vienna Declaration, the Berlin Declaration, and quite consistently, up until recently, actually Europe was the one that was kind of leading, I suppose, the conversation on Israel-Palestine before the US, actually.
Exactly.
And after all, the Oslo peace process, so obviously did it start in the EU, but it started in Norway, it started in Europe, before it then got taken over by the US and became a US-led peace process. And I think what we've seen over, I'd say, the last decade is Europe stepping back and relegating what was up for initially a traditional European leadership role, relegating that to the US. But that said, when you look at all the different conflicts, unfortunately, crowding out the agenda, it's still the Israel-Palestine one where we see the most, I suppose, developed and coherent EU policy position. And this is something that I think indicates that regardless of what else is happening in the Middle East, what happens in Israel and Palestine will remain vitally important to Europe. And also when one looks at the diplomatic resources and the financial resources and the time and effort that Europe has invested in trying to resolve this conflict, I think again this shows the importance that Europe attaches to it, and also indicates, I think, even going forward, you will continue to see this European engagement.
Well, Europe has been continuously engaged in the issue, but one of the trouble with Europe is that it is investing more than it is getting in return, meaning that Europe has been the largest donor to the Palestinian Authority, and Europe has been engaged with the issue, put so much energy into the issue. But what kind of leverage did Europe got either over Palestine or Hamas or Palestinian Authority and Israeli government?
So I think having abdicated its traditional political leadership role on the issue, as you said, now Europe has become what's often called, it's a donor, not a player. And I think to an extent that's perhaps unfair unfair characterization of Europe's role. But I think nevertheless, when you look at the donor aid to the Palestinians, Europe or the EU is the number one donor in that regard. So I think obviously that does give you a certain degree of leverage towards the Palestinians if you're willing to use that. And at this point, one should also underscore the fact that the money that Europe is investing, that the donor support to the Palestinian Authority, is also basically divesting Israel of the burden of having to finance the occupation. So European financing the Palestinian Authority, it's not just doing a favor to the Palestinians, it's actually doing a favor to the Israelis. And I think that's the way that one should understand it. And likewise, the European Union and its member states have developed over the past decades incredibly thick and deep bilateral relations with Israel in the areas of cultural exchanges, trade, economy, research and development. And I think, again, the conversation in Europe is very much about let's continue to deepen our relations in Israel, and that will continue. But I think where there is perhaps a moment of leverage is to say, yes, Europe is happy to continue deepening its relations, but this cannot benefit in any way Israeli settlements. So yes, we'll ink agreements with Israel, but these agreements need to explicitly indicate their inapplicability to Israeli settlements. because the EU is a community of rules and regulations, and therefore has a responsibility to ensure that its relations do not facilitate the violation of illegal actions by Israel in the occupied territories. So what this requires is for Israel to accommodate the EU's own legal necessity for the EU to respect its own rules and regulations. And we've seen, so what we've called this is the EU's differentiation policy, this sort of legalistically driven approach to the EU's bilateral relation with Israel in order to exclude the settlements as fully as possible. And considering that there's very little in terms of EU-Israel bilateral relations that have at some point been tainted by occupation or by the illegal activities, I think by standing behind this legal obligation, it takes very little until that actually starts to impact some potentially very important areas of the bilateral agreements.
True, but aren't there many loopholes in Europe's rules and regulation? So therefore, Israel is able to overcome all these restrictions that Europe theoretically put on the settlement and the settlement activities and the production from there.
Absolutely. And I think one of the main accusations that Israelis have made against Europe and against this European actions towards settlements is to say, oh, Europe is singling us out. But actually, when you look at what the EU and its member states have done to bring their bilateral relations with Israel in line with international obligations, actually it's been few and far between until now. It's a case of actually European leaders applying a political handbrake on this implementation of international rules and regulations and international law. But that said, I think the direction that we're moving in is a direction of greater compliance with the EU's legal obligations. It will take time, but this is the track that is going down, and Israel recognizes this. And so when one looks at the, I suppose, hysteria that's come out of certain Israeli quarters and the government faced with the European Commission's publication of guidelines on the correct indication of origin for settlement products or other issues, this created a hysterical reaction from Israel. But I think this, again, was Israel trying to draw a line in the sand, because it recognizes that although that specific action itself didn't have a financial consequence, or it is the beginning of a process that if this legal logic is continued, it can be expanded to other areas. So it's very much Israel trying to stop what's happening in its tracks and trying to browbeat and arm twist European leaders from continuing down this path.
Well, one of the qualities of Europe was that previously Europe was ahead of the US in denoting the right conceptualization of the issue. Europe was the first to call for the Palestinian statehood. Europe was the first to recognize the Palestinian national rights, etc., etc. When you look at today, what do you think? What would be the right policy for EU to pursue vis-a-vis Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Well, I think even before one starts to talk about policy, I think you have a moment where there is a vacuum in leadership towards the Middle East peace process. I think this is a moment where Europe has the possibility and almost the responsibility to step up and actually reassume a leadership position. I think this is something where even there's almost an implicit US government encouragement for Europe, if not to play, if not to create its own European-led peace process, to at the very least help create the conditions necessary for the resumption of meaningful negotiations further down the line. But again, it's Europe not really wanting to step up and still preferring that the US take the lead, as on other issues in the Middle East. But if you actually then want to start to talk about have a strategic conversation, then I think there's also another useful European deliverable on this. Ultimately, yes, the occupation will only end when the Israeli public itself decides that it's in its best interest to move towards the occupation. But I think to get there, a lot of it is about what strategy Palestinians adopt in order to try to leverage Israeli society and change the cost-benefit calculations of the Israeli public. And again, this is a Palestinian decision ultimately, but I think there is nonetheless a useful role that Europe can play in at least starting that strategic conversation with the Palestinians and outlining from a European point of view where we are, what we think has failed, and where we think Palestinians should start looking at in the future, whether it be an equal rights-based struggle or a more strategic approach to internationalization. I think this is an important conversation to have. I think there is a useful role that Europe can play in starting that.
Lastly, Europe, as you also put it, has quite significant leverage both over the Israel and over the Palestine. It is the largest donor to Palestine, and it is the largest trade partner of Israel. But when it comes to putting pressure on the sides to comply by Europe's preferred policies or projection, it doesn't seem that Europe doesn't seem to be that willing to apply pressure, pressure on the sides. Why so?
So I think when we're talking about Europe, there are certain developments that are happening at the level of the European public attitudes and grassroots initiative within Europe. And we have seen in European public opinion, a swing towards positions that are increasingly sympathetic of the Palestinian positions. And we do in most cases see their respective governments following that. And public pressure, I think, is quite important on European leaders to push them in that direction. But I think, fundamentally, changing European policy positions on Israel-Palestine or adopting a more forward-leaning approach is something that comes with a political headache for European leaders. So it's something that there is less appetite to initiate because of the domestic issues that this will throw up for European leaders. Again, this comes back to the fact that what is really absent here is, again, this Palestinian agency. To have a Palestinian leadership that is able to come to Europe, point out where they believe Europe is not meeting its own principles, its own legal requirements, and to hold European feet to the fire, and to pressure them into saying, this is not good enough, we need you to do X, Y, and Z. This conversation, unfortunately, does not exist at the moment. So there's very little pressure on European leaders to assume a more coherent position. I think if they're in a position where they have to choose, then I think, there's reason to believe that they'll fall on the right side of the line. But absent this pressure, they'll prefer to continue more, superficial or meaningless actions that are more geared towards, at best, conflict management rather than conflict resolution.
Thank you very much, Hugh. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much.